Hi there and welcome to this short manual handling awareness course brought to you courtesy of Safeti.com. I'm Richard Collins, your trainer for the course, and whether you're a seasoned manual handling veteran or you're completely new to the concept of manual handling in the workplace, here's some learning outcomes that we hope to achieve by the end of the course. We want to help you understand why manual handling is such a risk across many different industries. Secondly, we want to help you understand what parts of your body are most at risk from injury, the importance of good posture, and also the critical role that core strength plays in preventing injury. The next thing we want you to take away from this course is being able to approach a simple manual handling task within your workplace and to be able to perform a dynamic risk assessment. And lastly, we're going to show you a 5-step process that you can adopt when carrying out simple manual handling tasks in your workplace to ensure that you're lifting safely. Before we go any further, let's establish the answer to a very basic question, and that is, what is manual handling? Manual handling can be described as any physical action that you have to take where you're supporting or transporting a load by hand or by using bodily force. This includes lifting and carrying, pushing and pulling, moving, or setting down any type of object or load. Many jobs, of course, require frequent manual handling to be carried out. This does vary greatly according to what industry or job role that we're talking about. But let's learn a bit more about why it's so important to manage manual handling risk. Why are we so concerned with managing risk when it comes to manual handling in the workplace? Well, in simple terms, manual handling is one of the most common causes of injury at work. If we take Ireland as an example, you can see from the data on the screen that the most common cause of injury by quite some margin is manual handling. And if we look at where the injuries to the body occur, over 30% of injuries are related to the back, the arms or the shoulders. If we move across and look at Great Britain's latest injury and illness statistics, we can see that musculoskeletal disorders or MSDs are responsible for around 9 million working days lost each year, and a large proportion of that is made up by manual handling injury. By using a similar approach that we would take in other health and safety areas when it comes to managing risk, our first option and most desirable way of dealing with the risk would be to avoid or eliminate the risk entirely. When it comes to manual handling, what does this mean? Well, we have to ask ourselves, does the item, equipment or product really need to be moved? Is there another way that we can carry out this activity or task? You may find when you get some heads together to talk about where something needs to be moved and why it needs to be moved, you may find that there are other alternative solutions and better ways of going about it that helps you to avoid manual handling. Once we have limited the amount of movement of the materials, products, etc. as much as we reasonably can, then it's time to look at using substitution or engineering controls to reduce the risk further. That would be things like, if we're thinking about manual handling aids, for example, we could be using pallet trucks or dollies to move materials. If we're thinking about powered lifting equipment, we could use forklifts, for example. Or alternatively, we could look towards automation. In other words, the use of things like conveyor belts and robotic arms. It's important to remember that if you are using automation, mechanical aids and or lifting equipment, that there is enough consideration for the training of the people that are using them and that the equipment itself is suitable and sufficient. When we get to the stage where there's no further opportunity to use substitution and engineering controls, or at least it's not cost effective to do so, then it's time to move towards looking specifically at what manual handling remains. We can perform a manual handling risk assessment and work towards reducing that risk of injury further. Manual handling and lowering the risk of injury is not an exact science. There are lots of variables at play, so each task and unique environment requires specific consideration from those who manage and are responsible for the work. With that said, the application of a manual handling risk assessment and some basic manual handling principles can really help you reduce the likelihood of musculoskeletal and manual handling injuries. When it comes to manual handling, one of the most important things you can do to avoid injury is to look after your back. The natural shape of a spine, as you can see on the screen, is in a soft S shape. And you may be aware of the terminology that's often used when it comes to maintaining this natural shape, and that is to maintain a natural or neutral posture. If your spine is healthy, you should be able to maintain a neutral posture by simply keeping your body aligned and balanced throughout any movement that you do. However, even though your spine or back may be strong, it still needs to be looked after. Even on an ordinary, uneventful day, it takes a lot of pressure and punishment, and most of the time you may not even notice it. This means that it's really important for you to stay aware and conscious of how you sit, how you stand, how you move, and of course how you perform manual handling tasks, so we can make sure that you avoid both short and long-term injury. So the aim of the game is to start thinking more about your natural spine position and maintaining and trying to maintain that neutral posture as you go about your daily tasks. This means that your spine is in its natural aligned position and not twisted or bent in an awkward shape. Usually if you are in an awkward or non-neutral position, you will after a while start to feel some discomfort in your back. If you're sitting at a desk, for example, for too long, hunched over, you will feel discomfort after a while, and your body will be giving you signals with small levels of pain to try and move and shift into a different position. That's a good sign that you're not sitting with good posture. Of course, we understand that it's not natural to keep a neutral posture 100% of the time. What we're trying to do is minimize the amount of unnecessary stress on your upper body and to avoid incremental damage to your back, which may result in a more severe injury down the line. Now that we've looked at the natural position of the spine and how important it is to maintain a neutral posture, I want to talk just briefly on something called the power zone. What is the power zone? Well, the power zone, or the preferred working zone as it's also known, is the space between your mid-thigh and mid-chest where you can lift the most with the least amount of exertion. If the weight or load that you're lifting can be maintained and distributed within the power zone throughout the course of the lift, it makes it much easier for you to maintain a neutral posture, to avoid overextending or twisting, and therefore putting your back under stress. And of course, that means it's much less likely that you'll end up injured. Unfortunately, it's not always just as simple as knowing what the power zone is and lifting anything without adequate planning if you want to avoid injury. We have to consider variables such as the load type, individual capability, the frequency of when you're doing lifts and movements, staff training and so forth if we want to effectively reduce risk from manual handling. Guides such as the lifting and carrying guide here that you see on screen can be useful references to give you an indication of the typical weight tolerances for an average person. It's important to remember that each individual will have different abilities and needs, so please do consider who will be involved in any work as it is being planned and managed. As you can hopefully see from the demonstration here, even small changes to the body and load position can have a significant impact on the amount of weight that we're able to lift and move without creating a risk of injury. When we talk about lifting within the power zone, What we're really alluding to is the use of the core muscles, as you can see on the screen here, the stomach muscles, and also your glutes, yes, your backside, your buttocks, and your upper legs. The importance of using your core muscles as opposed to lifting with your back, as you can see in this terrible demonstration of how not to do it, cannot be overstated. By engaging those muscles, it allows you to maintain a very neutral posture, and of course that's what we're aiming for. A question that we often get asked during manual handling training is, does having a strong core reduce my chances of injury? Well, having a strong and conditioned core and set of core muscles, as we've discussed, will help your balance and stability and just your ability to lift safely. By using these muscles on a regular basis and getting your body used to it, you're going to be taking pressure, as we've already mentioned, off your back and those areas that are susceptible to injury. So any strength and conditioning exercises and stretches that you can do that will improve the strength of those core muscles and as well your back muscles and associated muscles in your upper body is only going to be beneficial when it comes to prevention of workplace injury. Now we've come to the practical part of this short awareness course, and we're going to use a simple lifting from the floor exercise just to demonstrate a 5-step process that you can use to allow you to perform dynamic risk assessment for simple manual handling tasks in your workplace. I'll also leave a link below to the full course version that's available on our website at safeti.com with quizzes and certificates in case it's useful for you, your team, or your employees. So thanks again for visiting us here on our YouTube channel, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.